Information America's farmers and ranchers need to know. Adams on Agriculture. Now back to Mike Adams.
Well, as the debate continues over climate change, what will the impact be on agriculture? Let's talk about it with Terry Fleck, Executive Director for the Center for Food Integrity. Terry, thank you for joining us. What is your research showing about the discussion, the conversation that's going on right now about climate change and how agriculture is viewed in this debate?
Well, thanks, Mike, for asking and having me on. This is just one of those conversations that members of the center were curious about where the conversation was around climate change, particularly as we came to a close of 2019. And so just by way of quick background, we use a research tool called digital ethnography, where it allows us to explore a lot of different topics and trends in real time, looking at millions of consumer interactions online that help us understand a little bit about their motivations, who they are, how mature the trend is. So what we were curious about was what is being discussed at the current time, and in particular, we had a little more refined objective to try to boil down to what is the conversation around causes and solutions. In particular, are consumers linking climate change to the production and consumption of animal proteins like beef and poultry, and whether or not consumers are really associating a local food movement to an improvement or a solution to climate change. What was probably not surprising to us, particularly given the attention to sustainability issues, is most of the conversations throughout the past year now were really mired in this whole debate on whether climate change exists. So when we were looking at the climate change term, we really saw two basic camps: those that were ardent believers in climate change and those that were calling those ardent believers alarmists and not being attentive to the longer-term view. A little surprising, probably about 1 in 4 of adult Americans were involved somewhat in that debate online, just over 52 million consumers. What was interesting, though, to us was the predicted shift in the conversation that's likely to take place over the next 12 to 24 months. And in particular, we see two different camps emerging fairly strongly. One camp that wants to discuss the causes of climate change, and another camp wanting to talk about solutions. So we're seeing growth in both of those arenas to probably well over 80 million Americans being involved in either of these conversations one way or the other as we move into 2020.
Well, we've seen a couple of things, Terry, recently. A Hollywood awards show announcing they weren't going to serve meat because of their concerns over greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And, of course, the ongoing push for some of these imitation meat products in the marketplace. And there seems to be a thinking for some of the people supporting that they're helping to save the planet somehow by consuming those products. Is this a sign of things to come, you think, as this debate ratchets up in the next few months?
I do, Mike. I think it is the sign of things to come. You're quite right. We're seeing people involved in the conversation that want to bring about change. So they're taking personal action. They want to be informed. They want to tell others. They want to protect resources. The other thing, though, that we are seeing is that they are looking to science and innovation to help provide some solutions. So when we talk about or when we look at the conversation around causes, it is associated with carbon-related topics, CO2 emissions, things of this nature, burning fossil fuels, greenhouse gases. And those that are looking for solutions are, again, looking at how do we reduce emissions, how do we reduce greenhouse gases. And there is some of that conversation, particularly around improving some of these areas, really talking around what do we change, and some of that is around conversations on cattle farming, reducing meat consumption, industrialization, overfishing. Those are all very prominent topics today.
We're talking with Terry Fleck, Executive Director for the Center for Food Integrity. Terry, I wonder, though, is this discussion, how will it be driven? By emotion or by fact? And we've seen before emotion and fear drive the GMO debate in this country. And now I wonder if that takes place in this one as well, because we've seen numbers and statistics showing that the percentages of greenhouse gas emissions by agriculture are very small in the total picture, but yet it seems like a lot of people want to focus on that and ignore some of the bigger contributors. So will facts win this argument, or is this going to be an emotional argument and debate?
No, I think facts will eventually win the day, Mike. That's not to say that emotions won't begin the conversation, but when we look at the profile of those that are involved in the conversation, just a couple points on this one. It tends to be slightly more female than male. You're going to find that well over 65% of those conversing about this are going to be younger, 18 to 44 years of age, middle class. Most likely single or married without children are the ones that are talking the most about this. One of the interesting aspects of that audience means that these are information-seeking consumers. So they crave credible information from sources they can trust, which then gives us the opportunity to engage the conversation. And that's really, I think, where the opportunity is for food and agriculture. Is now's a great time to initiate the conversations about the kinds of things that we are doing, providing balanced information, providing third-party studies that give them a forum to engage, as you say, around the facts, and then suggest ways that they can make a difference.
So you think there is a sizable portion of the country, of the population, that is open-minded on this and actually seeking good, accurate information and haven't already made up their minds on it?
Correct. Yeah, that's why we're seeing such great growth in our predictive tool around those who want to discuss causes and solutions. Of course, part of the solution is focusing in on what are the true causes, and this is where third-party credible information will be most helpful around that, and then directing conversations toward, let's talk about solutions, about what can be done to help this out, what can be done for you to do your part in being part of that change. So again, this is where, particularly in food and ag, where we talk about where we're reducing the carbon footprint, where we're attentive and knowledgeable about greenhouse gases, calling attention to our own house, making sure our own house is in order, not necessarily pointing the finger at a bunch of other people, but helping people move, as you say, from the emotion to the facts in the conversation.
As I think the concern for agriculture is that agriculture won't get credit for reducing its carbon footprint and the strides that have been taken and the improvements that have been made, and instead we're going to get a lot of heavy-handed regulation coming down from the federal government, on agriculture that's not really warranted. I think that's the concern many have.
Yeah, and that's where we're also seeing many of the commodities and ag groups starting conversation with Congress around climate-smart practices, issues of soil conservation, soil health, alternative crops, and doing their part to encourage and continue to encourage the change. But you're right, those of us that have been involved with the change for several years need to do our part to continue to let people know that this is continuous improvement. We have made great strides and great changes, and certainly looking forward to science and innovation helping us do even more.
We're so driven by social media, and sometimes social media can be misleading as far as the majority of people's thoughts or feelings. So is there a concern that a minority of voices could sound bigger than they are in driving, regulation or changes on agriculture.
Yeah, that's always the concern. And again, as we looked at this research piece, looked at who's involved in the conversation now, little over 52 million consumers, where that's going to be over the next 12 to 24 months, which is just over 88 million. Again, these are online conversations, so a lot more people getting involved in that topic, which is why we have to be in the social channels on a regular basis, being active in those conversations, being visible in those conversations. So again, it's just motivational on our part to be there, to be talking about our story, and again, to be focusing primarily on that younger audience, talking about how science and innovation are really fostering change and development for the future.
Yeah, and very important to be involved in those discussions and conversations because they are going to be taking place, that's for sure, on this topic of climate change. Very interesting research and findings, Terry, and some thoughts as we move forward on this. Thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome, Mike. Thanks.
Take care. Terry Fleck, Executive Director for the Center for Food Integrity. Stay with us. You're listening to AOA, Adams on Agriculture.